maybe another 200 to 400 scattered in the rest of the countries. So India always has sort of really cared to push the envelope for people to ever become more aware of being empty themselves. Most of the spiritual teaching all really relates to things that cause a person to become more empty of themselves, you know. And then a vigilance that somebody would hold by holding their arm up, or a vigilance that somebody would hold not to eat anything, or not to participate in the sort of things that sort of most people just would do every day, perhaps. To have a vow of poverty is not an uncommon sort of thing, you know, for someone not to own anything himself. And then there's Meher Baba. My grandfather really connected with Meher Baba. Meher Baba was a very amazing, quite amazing influence sort of in a lot of this work. You know, Meher Baba didn't speak for some maybe 37 or 38 years. And he got everything done without saying anything. But of course he did say a lot, but not through his voice. So, you know. So he just took about silence. A God realization, charity. He said some most beautiful sort of things that were teachings, that were things like he might say, it's something my grandfather would say that he said, which was very nice. He said, no matter how far you go out there, he would say, no matter how far, he would say, one might listen have remembered. It's not very beautiful, his language. He would say, one might listen have remembered. To forget, less than have remembered to forget themselves. This comes from Meher Baba. Then another one he would say, it's like this, where he would say, no matter how far somebody would travel inside himself, how deep they would go within themselves, then hopefully one can remember to exercise a charitableness. A charitableness with forgiveness. He had some very simple sort of things that he said which were incredible, you know. Yeah.
Is he still alive? Is he alive?
No, he passed away about 15 years ago, something like that. I remember when he passed away. Out of all of the teachers, he's sort of one of the teachers that sort of I've really followed quite a bit over the years, and what he wrote and what people said. Another teacher, Ramana, is another teacher who has influenced me and influenced this work a lot also. Maharishi Ramana, also another great teacher that my grandfather connected with quite a bit. So those two teachers really are amazing. Actually, there's some great writings and things from these teachers. And then there's another teacher, Nagathara, who has wrote a book, I Am That. And their sort of event is very similar. It all sort of is like not Bhagavad Gita, but texts that were written, Vedic texts that were written that... Yeah, there's a few, but it's writings before the Bhagavad Gita, and there's just a great philosophy which, you know, is incredible. It's well really thought out. And then it's so similar to another really ancient philosophy, which is a philosophy that's come through my teacher Cloud, that's Toltec, and this is much older than Buddhism, and this also is it's ancient. It's not anything. The things that are said. Come on in. The things that are said. There's not anything much that you could add to. You know, I mean, the things that are said. There's not much you could take away from. It's like it stands by itself. You know.
The common documentary about Muhammad Ali.
But yes.
At the end, he went once and you gave a lecture to Oxford, and one of the students, they say in the document, one of the students.
We can move that a little bit further, Sarah. Okay, we could move that a little bit so you don't, the seat, your back is not into that waterfall. Okay. You're a bit high up there, but maybe that's a good spot. As long as you're okay with it, might get a bit of a draft from the door. Is that okay? We do feel we might like to open the door for 5 minutes to let a little fresh air in. We can do this. Are we on, Bob?
Yeah.
We are. Oh my goodness. All right. Hello. Welcome. This is the fourth lecture in a series of lectures that we're doing, our Phoenix Fastician training. Today's lecture is about colloidal biology, and this is probably one of the most fascinating areas of investigation for those people seriously pursuing and interested in knowing how to be a good guide and help a person heal, and to understand some of the very things which really is to do with live food on a level that's microscopic. So tonight we're going to be talking about some very interesting and curious and strange phenomena of colloidal biology. Colloidal biology is a term that, one of the several terms that we've coined, which is starting to become more popular. Colloids of life and life colloids are also terms which we've coined. A colloid of life is smaller than 600,000th of an inch small. It's so small it resists the pull of gravity. Cosmic energy is condensed into colloids, and these colloids of life are the building blocks of all DNA and the building blocks of all life. Colloids of life form into life colloids. So a colloid of life is a small building block of a life colloid. And I just will share with you that the distinction between what's inanimate and what has life is very blurred at this level. We can see that things can form as a result of a subatmospheric pressure. Carbon crystallizes in our body, it becomes a solid matter. A matter forms from these tiny small colloids. And that microscopic investigation has drawn a veil back on a twilight zone, which is like of a forgotten dimension. And so today's lecture, for those people viewing the tape, is very much about drawing back this veil on this twilight zone of a forgotten dimension, and looking in to the invisible and starting to describe some of the things that are occurring on this invisible level. And just before we begin, I might just share with you, how is it possible for me, where I am, to have come up with this insight? Very simply, I've come up with this deep insight as a result of an exhaustive investigation of those researchers and people who have forwarded information that is actual living observation of things. So I let go stained cell techniques and all of this sort of thing, which was mostly what was taught at the university. And I only up to this point had known about using stains and things to view things within the cell. But many things that I saw were just simply called artifacts. And I knew they couldn't just be artifacts, but they just had the name artifacts. There were centrioles and little organisms that were present, but nobody sort of really had a name for any of these. And little by little I discovered that Reich, at the turn of the century, had a very sophisticated microscope, and he also was very fascinated to look into the invisible. He had one of the most sophisticated microscopes in Europe at the time, and I've had such good fortune that I've also had a good ability to look under the most sophisticated microscopes on the earth, which very few people have had the opportunity to do. I've looked at and used blue-green fluorescent pigments and things to see how cells move and the structure of the cell and things, and this sort of thing, like no one really has ever seen this before. Reich looked at hay fermenting under the microscope, and it was very strange that between June and July he could see things under his microscope that he never saw any other time of the year. And this was just very interesting because for sure he saw these things, but you can imagine, like, you were the one, you looked through the microscope, you saw these things, and now you're going to tell people what you saw. Lots of people said, "You saw these things? What? Where?" And he said, "Well, that's very interesting." He said, "I saw them in June and July." And then I didn't see him anymore after that, no matter what I did. Anyway, really? He was so for sure what he'd seen, because he'd spent hours and hours, days, sometimes 16 hours of observation, only looking away from the microscope for short periods of time to absolutely witness things forming under the microscope, which no one else really has done except a few other researchers which I can mention. So that was very fascinating to me, that Reich could see things under the microscope for only a few days of the year, but the rest of the time he couldn't see anything. And then others also started to see some things also, but it was just very sporadic what they saw. And it can be explained why Reich only saw these things at a certain time of the year, because ultraviolet light is a very short wavelength, and that very short wavelength illuminated things that were not ordinarily visible to our eye because of the length of the rays that were coming through. So ultraviolet light coming more through in June and July allowed those researchers sometimes to get a glimpse of things with reasonably sophisticated microscopes at the time, to witness various things, and they called them all sorts of names. I listed maybe in colloidal biology perhaps about 12 or 15 different names that they've all been called, because no one sort of could come up with some sort of agreement as to what to call them. Some people call them bions, some people call them microzymas, others call them centrioles, vesicles, spores, somatids, and they are just some of the names that they've been called. We could see that there was no distinction between what is living and what is inanimate, and we could see that every step of the way that you section something down that's living, there's something else that's living that has its own reproductive cycle and schedule that makes up the cell. Further sort of research, I discovered work that Lepenshovsky had done, and her sister, and her daughter, in Russia, and it was very controversial because she realised that a cell can arise from matter where there was no cell before. Now this absolutely just is a brick that doesn't fit even in the present existing theories and things, because it's just a fancy theory that how cells arise. Virchow in France has had an ironclad doctrine which has ruled the medical world, and the idea that a cell comes from a cell. But the question of how could a cell have arisen originally on the earth if there was no cell? They couldn't really explain this at all. But this colloidal biology is a brand new understanding of biology, and so those of us who are witnessing this tape today, we're going to get a really good little bit of a glimpse into what happens when you eat something. We can't sort of see it, but we see some of the effects of stuff when you cook and this sort of thing. What happens on a colloidal level? And what are some of the very vital things that we should absolutely have a good knowledge of that can be the base core elements for you as a Phoenix Fastician doing a 60-hour certification? Somebody would ask you, what is colloidal biology? You have the ability to be able to say, it is a brand new understanding of biology, which is a realization that every step of the way that you section things further and further inward, we come to a life form that is composing this major life form. So a cell, for instance, is made up out of individual things you can find individually in nature. Every single thing a cell is made of can be found individually in nature, and a cell is merely a composition of elements that you can find in nature, simply having come together in a relationship called symbiosis. Symbiosis is the realization that we live with a multitude of organisms that help make up our cells and make up our life. So in colloidal biology, for instance, these spirochetes, which are organisms that have evolved, that are still in the mud, they have evolved to make up our brain cells and muscle cells and things. There's organisms which actually clot the blood and grow things within the blood, like a vine net, which actually is an organism. Though there is no DNA in blood, blood pooled, the colloids of this blood becomes what's called a menorah, just a fused mass of colloids, and out of this fused mass of colloids, a nucleated cell can arise. So a nucleated cell can arise where there was no nucleus before. Nucleic acid and the very materials to make DNA and everything can arise directly out of the colloids of the blood. So you might say that the genetic material is in the blood, though there is no DNA in the blood. So I studied Gunther Enderlin's work in Germany. I studied Tsushima's work in Japan, and I studied Gaston Nasson's work in Quebec. And then I've really looked under microscopes and things since to come up with this new theory of how blood is formed, and this new theory of new insight into colloidal biology. So far we've really basically said that colloidal biology really is an understanding of a symbiosis, and that we live in a symbiosis. That's very important insight, because then we could say that this tree is made up out of various organisms and spores, which makes up the leaf and makes up everything. And then as this would return back to the earth, the very spores and everything that make this up can turn back into molds and fungus and yeast. When we cook something, there are life forms which perfectly survive that temperature, which have enzyme-resistant heat-resistant enzymes. These heat-resistant enzymes actually go to work to help break that food down and that sort of thing, even if it was cooked. But it changes the nature of the food. So we're really looking at a very small level, on a colloidal level, and our blood is a colloid, our tissue is a colloid, and when a colloid becomes congealed or coagulated as a system, it might not so easily undo itself. So it's very important to be able to understand that solvents, petroleum product, coal tar products, and other solvents that have come from plants even, are extremely detrimental in colloidal systems because that congeals and coagulates the colloidal system. Petroleum product, extremely detrimental. So people who put petroleum jelly on baby's butt and Johnson's baby powder and and all of these other things were unwittingly really causing the colloids of the body less than to actually really be in a good standing that they should, because the petroleum product is so detrimental. Detergents that clothing is washed with, that has a fragrance, these lots of detergents on the market and things also are extremely deleterious to colloidal systems and things. So when we look at a colloidal system, we can see that the protein of this is made out of colloids which are wound in a tiny spherical sort of circumstance. When heat is applied to this, that unwinds and it no longer really has its proper colloidal shape. It actually has unwound and like for instance, you might remember having cooked an egg, or when you see the egg, it's cracked and it goes into the frying pan or whatever, or the boiling water. It's very liquidy, and then slowly the temperature causes a gelling of that, and it eventually becomes solid, and so no longer can that be mixed into water. That egg, if it was raw, it could have been mixed into water, but the moment that it's cooked, it no longer is hydrostatic, meaning mixable with water. It's become hydrophobic, meaning it's not miscible with water. So these two terms are very important in colloidal biology, that the materials that one would have brought in does have its hydrostatic ability, meaning that it can be mixed as a water with the protein of our cell. That the protein that's brought in can be mixed with the water of our cell. All things have to be water soluble. If it's not water soluble, it's going to be a bit of a challenge for the body to overcome. So when we bring in an oil which is unheated, it perfectly has the ability to be miscible with water because of the enzymes and a biotic life force that's present whilst it still has its life force. Once it's cooked, it has no life force. Then no longer can it really be miscible with water. So if you take a very good olive oil and you remember washing your plate, if you had a bit of salt on your plate, actually it's going to make like a soap, and you won't have to use any detergent material to clean your dishes. There is no caking, because a colloidal system has many spare electrons which helps keep everything apart and flowing. So we might say this, that within the colloidal system of our cells, in the gaseous and gelatinous and more fluid-like liquid state of our body, our body and cells and elements are only kept in position and relationship to each other as a result of having spare electrons. When we cook, it robs electrons from what was cooked, and hydrogen, which is some 90% of the whole of the known universe, which makes up a large portion of the body in pounds, hydrogen is the major carrier of spare electrons, and this only is found for the most part in organic foods which have their life force. So you really don't find any much in wheat, you don't find it in legumes much, you don't find it in carrot, but you'll find an enormous amount in burdock, you'll find an enormous amount in dandelion, you'll find in parsley, you'll find it in most everything except the starchy vegetables and fruit which are not live foods. Banana, dates, potato, corn, carrot, beet, rice, wheat are some examples of this, are those foods which really have very little negative hydrogen ions. So organic produce has a lot more negative hydrogen ions, and hydrogen is the carrier of spare electrons in the body to run the whole body electrics. So you could say that our body is very much pH sensitive. It's sensitive, and enzymes are sensitive to only operate within a certain pH range. Plant enzymes have a very wide range that they can be employed within. Enzymes from animal have a very narrow range that they can work within, and many people have reached a stage where the enzyme pH background canvas that the chemical equations and things take place within in the body is less than present like it really should be. From eating flesh and all acid-forming foods, there can be more protons in the body, which leads to more acid and not enough electrons, really. The acid, spare protons and things are all stored away in fat cells and this sort of thing to help keep it out of the body. But that really is just an acidification, and fat is just merely acid. Alkaline elements wash away acid. Alkaline elements help the body reduce all adipose tissue which is really just like baggage. So enzymes are pH sensitive. When we look under the microscope, we see that once something is cooked, several things occur. There's a congealing and coagulating of the protein, colloidal system, which is kind of irreversible. Enzyme linkages between the hydrogen bonds of that material become disfigured. And when you look at glutamate molecule, for instance, that comes from nature, it has this nice spherical sort of a pattern, but then once it's cooked, it can still sort of fit into the glutamate receptors of the brain and this sort of thing, but it's not so easily able to be cleared from the body. It can become excitotoxic, it can create Alzheimer's and Parkinsonian-like symptoms, cause people less to have good memory, and generally, as we age, the brain less than keeps its weight. And women keep their brains longer than men. Men's brains tend to atrophy fairly fast. Once they reach the age of about 50, men's brains atrophy fairly fast. And there's some reasons why this is so, which mostly relates to gender roles and this sort of thing. So pleomorphism is the ability that these organisms that form. So let's just talk about this just briefly. There's a spiral and wavy motion in the universe. Everything wants to kind of curl back in on itself, and it has a little tail. So these colloids love to join into strings. So if we have a darkened background and just a beam of light here now, we'd see, though only maybe few, because we've got this air filter on, but we'd see very few of these colloids of light, colloids of life having joined into strings. And so these like to fall back in on themselves, and they have a little tail which then disappears. Now you have something which really has the ability to act like an amplifier of cosmic energy, and then material coats itself around this, and we have this sort of like a rhomboid shape, and this is the very building block that joins with other material like this, and life arises from inanimate material. DNA is made up primarily out of spores, and these spores are two positives and two negatives. One is spinning to the right and out and down, and one is spinning to the left, in and up. So one is cationic and one is anionic. These two, when they combine, energy is released. So colloids like to join into strings, and strings like to join into circles, and then these circles join with other circles and things, and life arises. This material floats through outer space, and spores have seeded themselves all over the earth, and you really could say like a chicken and a human being really are just merely the fruiting body of a walking fungus, basically. So you and I, we really are like just like the fruiting body of a spore or a sperm, and we're the fruiting body of this, just like a walking fungus, basically. If we look at all life below the level of a fungus, every single character in an unabridged, is the Webster's dictionary here? Yes. In an unabridged Webster's dictionary would be and represent every single life form that exists on the earth, and then you would come to one period out of all the characters in the unabridged Webster's dictionary, and that one period represents all life above a fungus. So all the life that exists on the earth is below the level of a fungus, basically. And there's a lot of life in the sea which is more silica based and not carbon based. And so all life is composed up out of colloids of life forming into life colloids, and these life colloids living in symbiosis with each other to make up an organism. And pleomorphism is the ability in colloidal biology of a spore, which in modern medicine they call that a virus, but those people who have this insight call it a spore because they're aware that this is a building block of a bacteria, which people who are virologists, they have no idea yet that this is a building block of a bacteria. This is called pleomorphism. Monomorphism is what they've taught presently, and that's a virus has a fixed form, which is untrue, extremely, and gross error. So this is new information that just sort of doesn't, it's a brick that doesn't fit into the present wall of virology, and it means that much they've studied is just completely erroneous and wrong, actually, and misleading. So they don't know what to do with this piece of information, because as this brick goes in, the wall will come tumbling down. So a spore is a building block of a bacteria, and a bacteria develops a hardened shell wall and becomes a mold. Mold grows in colonies and becomes a fungus. And fungus releases a spore in its most advanced form is a yeast. And so the culminating evolutionary process ends up as a yeast. We have in our blood 3 stages of pleomorphism, pleomorphic organisms, which are vital for functioning. And we have blood-borne inhibitors that block the evolution of this life colloid beyond a double spore. So these colloids of life join and become what's called a spore, and these spores join with other spores and become what's called a double spore, and this double spores then fuse with other double spores and become a bacteria. The bacteria develops a hardened shell wall, becomes a mold. Mold grows in colonies, becomes a fungus, and fungus releases in most advanced culminating form as a yeast. So this is an evolutionary cycle, and you could say this is all one life cycle, and this is called pleomorphism. Those who are interested really to investigate this a little bit more, colloidal biology is really a wonderful work explaining this work. It's sort of and then we have a sequel to this that's coming out shortly called Jubb Cell Rejuvenation, Colloidal Biology, a Symbiosis. So what can somebody share with me right now? What does a symbiosis mean?
Symbiosis is an exchange between two the other is...
Yes, they live in relationship with each other. So symbiosis is merely the realization that we're a collection of a multitude of organisms, all of us. And you could say that we're just like one big walking anthill. You know, we're a big, huge walking anthill, basically.
I gotta interrupt you for one
Sure,
minute.
go for it. So we just had a small break, and we had a question during the break. What is cosmic energy? Cosmic energy primarily is the predominant energy that's here on the earth, that's all pervasive, that when you walk around, you're simply walking through this energy, which is pervasive and inside of everything. You and I, we are just like vapors compared to this energy, which is solid, and we walk through this as vapors, this solid energy. Cosmic energy is vast majority of it's the smallest wavelength of energy that we have on the earth, and it's the most predominant form of energy that we have on the earth, and the vast majority of this energy comes, some 80% of it comes astrally, is an astral origin, originating from other suns. Some of this energy, some percentage of this is from our own sun, and then some of it is terrestrial. So cosmic energy is the finest energy that exists, and then everything around us, you could say, is a condensed degree or graded degree of cosmic energy, an appearance of this inside consciousness. When the sun is out, cosmic energy doesn't have as much of its effect. When the sun goes down, cosmic energy really can be condensed, and that's when growth occurs in the deepest of sleep and rest. And this only really, cosmic energy is condensed in, and things grow mostly as a result of the materials being formed at night. So when we look under the microscope, there are some things which perfectly survive the heat, but much is very volatile, and though we can still get some benefit from some things which are fairly stable, stable elements on the periodic chart that have an even amount of electrons, and material that's made of elements which have an even amount of electrons are stable, and then all elements which have an odd amount of electrons, like potassium has 19 electrons, is very unstable and changes its acid-alkaline balance as a result of being heated. It loses that odd electron, becomes positively charged, and so because the cell membrane is primarily positively charged because of hydrogen, what happens when potassium, which has become more positively charged and has lost its spare electron, tries to get inside the cell? Two positives repel each other. So unless that's complexed, unless that's organised in such a way it can't fit quite into the blades of the mill like wind can to turn the mill. It just doesn't fit into the blades of the mill. It's actually repelled. So when we cook it really does denature the food by changing the hydrogen bonds and causing the food to lose its three-dimensional structure. When we cook the food, the colloids material unwind and become congealed and coagulated and hydrophobic. Electrons are spun off and causes that material to become more positively charged and more ashen. It loses its biotic force. And so these are some of the very things which are denaturing in cooking. And so cooked food is very inferior because of these things. No animals, no life forms eat cooked food except for humans and domesticated animals. If we were meant to eat cooked food, we would all be born with stoves already attached. And we don't see that anywhere. So, you know, any of us could sit still long enough and just observe what is in nature, and then we could apply anything simply just by saying, well, is this natural? If it's not natural, it's like, well, I don't know, it could be something about that. If there's waste in the system, that's unnatural, because there is no waste in nature. Everything is perfectly recyclable. Everything is broken down to there's an end point where it's zero. And in colloidal biology, it's a very important point, because much that's consumed today cannot be broken down till it's an end point where it is zero. That's a problem. Because what happens to something that doesn't have its enzymes? Now it's a junk in the body. What happens to junk in the body that doesn't have its enzymes? A plant fibre. What happens to plant fibre? If you have a piece of paper and you give it some of the conditions so life can arise, what will happen to this paper? It will break down into the spores that it's made of from the tree. And perfectly, if it's given a little bit of water, it will break back down into the colloids of the tree that it came from, exactly. And it will become mold, fungus and yeast. It doesn't have to be inoculated from the outside. The very paper itself will break down into this material, the same as the body. Colloidal biology is the realization that cells and bacteria can arise from substrate material where no cells were before, just like proteinaceous material. Colloidal biology and how this relates to our Finks physicians, you could say that inflammation in the body and congestion and extra blood in areas which shouldn't be is the primary cause of cancer and disease. So unchecked inflammation in the body is the primary cause of this, and blood, the colloids of the spent red blood corpuscles having fused with each other and extravasated in the extra cellular fluid, join and fuse and become what's called a monera, M-O-N-E-R-A, like manure, only manera, and from this manera a nucleated cell can arise of the body, a somatic cell can arise, a bacteria could have arisen from that, mold or fungus or yeast. We have in our blood-borne inhibitors that block the expression of the life colloid of life, spore and double spore. And then we have these blood-borne inhibitors that block the double spore's evolution into a bacteria. Life with health requires these organisms to be present in our body in a healthy state, and whilst we have these blood-borne inhibitors, it blocks the expression of this evolutionary state beyond the double spore stage. So the moment that we less than keep our blood-borne inhibitors, these organisms go through their life cycle and they actually reclaim us back to the earth as the dust that we came from. So the blood condition wants life to arise or not. Someone who, I've worked lots with people who had a diagnosis of AIDS, which AIDS is absolutely, there is no such thing as a virus attacking the body. That is absolutely untrue. There is no such thing as an AIDS virus. No virus has ever been isolated. The people who tried to get something have no idea about pleomorphism, and they really have no idea about nutrition. You know, we've got people who've written books to say that something is the cause of something and they have no idea about nutrition. Like Robert Gallo, for instance, and others. They have led the world stir crazy and ruined people's lives all over the earth from all the drugs that they foisted on people and that sort of thing, and the erroneous tests and things that are done, which none of those tests are definitive tests for any virus, not a single one. And the makers of these tests are adamant that people would be aware of this. There is no person who has a test for the virus who will, as a researcher says, it's a definitive test for the virus. Not the polymer chain reaction test, which is one of the common ones, not the ELISA or the Western blot at all is a definitive test for any virus. And but that's another topic. But the thing we might sort of just simply say is that there is an acquired information deficiency. And there's more of an acquired information deficiency syndrome than there is really an acquired immune deficiency syndrome. The terrain of the body, if what we're talking about is true, which it is, means that the colloid material of our body can become a spore again. It can break down into a spore. Lots of researchers and doctors have given people a diagnosis that they have some condition and it's attacking their body, and just by the thousands people have come and healed simply by clearing up the overgrowth of bacteria from the intestinal tract. So any expansion of the girth is taken up by debris in the intestinal tract, and that is an overgrowth, whether you know it or not. It is an overgrowth. If I look at your blood, you have any debris that's in the body, an expanded girth. If you're a female, it should really only be about 23, 24 inches around the waist, and male should really only be about 26 inches around the waist. Any expansion of the girth, because one can go into the waist, and you can pull out whatever fat is present. That's the stuff that you can sort of get hold of like that. So if your mind is that, but then you kind of like look at whatever else is left that actually is the expansion of the girth. That expansion is debris. And what is this? This is mold, fungus and yeast. The liver is the chief of traffic control central, and it really is the guard basically, and only sort of will allow so much to sort of be there, and it really will manage everything up to a certain point. But bile stones, which we've started to talk a little bit about, occludes the liver from emptying itself, and so the liver has a force to help carry things away from itself, but not much to transport things back. So when mold, fungus and yeast, there is overgrowth in the intestinal tract, which is called dis-ease. Could someone have dis-ease if they just were a worrywart, but they ate well? No. One could be a worrywart till the end of their days, and though it could contribute something, the primary cause of the chief undertaker arriving generally is one's teeth. Most people have dug their own grave with their teeth, and we are digging the grave of the earth with our teeth. So I connect with Greenpeace and World Watch and other major organisations, and sometimes go to talk as a scientist to help people realise what's occurring in the ecology and how our choice of food is affecting the earth. And that's another topic. But in colloidal biology, the most important thing is this: that we're made up of all these organisms, and that we live in symbiosis with these organisms, and that the terrain of our body is the most important element. That you could say that this whole session today that you're watching on video relates to. So wherever there would have been unchecked inflammation, there's a heat, there's extra fluid, extra fluid, there's fermentation, because fermentation is part of the body's ability to be able to heal itself. There's congestion, and there's the very ideal environment for our cells to have grown unchecked because of mold, fungus and yeast having released hormonal-like substances which are like estrogenic, and these estrogenic-like substances cause rapid cell wall growth from a process of colloids aggregating, fusing and differentiating, not through mitotic cell division. Mitotic cell division is little. Most of our cells arise as a result of having been a red blood cell originally, and the colloids of the red blood cell having aggregated and fused and then specialised into a cell, specific sort of a cell. So in colloidal biology, it's the realisation that we're made up out of a multitude of organisms, and that we have health whilst these multitude of organisms have their health. And when they less than have their health, they abandon their role in helping and aiding us, and they turn to their own demise. And that is called dis-ease. So it's all about an ease with a dis in front. So it's a disruption to the ease that we ordinarily feel, and that's what this word means. All dis-ease primarily arises as a result of stagnation and putrefaction and fermentation of material in the intestinal tract. And eventually, if you sat still enough, no matter how young you were, if you had your gut full but you sat still, you could die from that. The natives, they chose the moment when they would die very bravely. They could see that they had possibly become a burden, and that the winter had come on, and they would look at this very peacefully, and they ever would see their life now was of no use, and that could be a burden to the family, and they chose the moment more or less that they would die. They often went out with a blanket and would sit very still, and the cells would slowly become depolarized, so then they would no longer have their electricity. So we're better for movement. Anything that's still, things that move is probably one of the direct sort of indications of life being there. If you looked under a microscope and you saw something wriggling, immediately that's very delightful, because something wriggling is absolutely means must be life. But this is very interesting that the colloids are so small that they dance around under the microscope, you know, and they really dance around and they bounce around, and it's like, my God, it's like a mass there, swarming mass. And this is called Brownian motion. And Brownian motion is that these colloids have a negative charge and they repel each other. And if you had a habit formed that was live food, then that material is so small that if you have a little horsetail, for instance, the silica, you could join the surface area of that silica in a straight line, a cubic inch would stretch from here to the moon 17 times. So in a cube, an inch by an inch of silica from horsetail, you have the surface area that if we lined that up in a straight line with the colloids, it would stretch 17 times the distance from here to the moon. And when you cook that colloids, it shortens that area to maybe from here to Houston. So it really is maybe still for some people a long way if you had to walk from here to Houston, but 17 times the distance from here to the moon. Just this distance from here to Houston is like an enormous changes taking place once something has been cooked. So things which cannot stand that heat process are elements which are very volatile, and they often happen to be the very elements that are needed that deficiency can have been created as a result of what someone brought in. No deficiency is caused because of what one has not brought in. All deficiency is caused because of what one has brought in that was not a whole food. So that's a question that we'll ask our Phoenix physicians. What creates deficiency? And the answer is habit of having brought things in which was destructive causes deficiency. No deficiency is caused because of what one did not bring in. Only things brought in which were unstable caused an instability of the body. So let's see. Would you like a little minute's worth of flute?
Yes.
Because it might help everyone make sure they're getting this information. Colloids on this level of pulling back this veil or this forgotten dimension of a twilight zone, some very unusual things become apparent. When we ever become aware of even how movement came to be in life. We could take a plant and we could, let's see, like a root. We could take that root and as it starts to grow, we could turn the root, and then it wants to grow down, and we turn the root, and then it wants to go down again, and we turn the root. We could turn this 4 times, and then as it grows with a wiggle. We've imparted a movement and gravity and overcoming of inertia in the field of the colloids that assembled. The plant got used to a stimulus that involved it having to change its direction as it grows. And so from then on, this plant will always grow actually with a wiggle. Energetics colloids are very sensitive to energy, and we can change things on this level simply through the energetics, and this is sort of very amazing. Some of this sort of insight is in this new work, Jubb cell rejuvenation, for those people that's interested. So let's talk a little bit about this for a moment. We've said that colloids really exist. They've got many spare electrons. How small that colloid is, how small and how round it is, the smaller it is and the more round it is, the more it likes to collect electrons that whiz around it at an enormous pace. And this colloid can help keep other colloids at bay, and this is the very material substance that our body is composed of. The moment that there is a loss of spare electrons, you could say in colloidal biology we are like a wet cell battery. That whilst the battery is still alkaline, you can get the flashlight to go on. But the moment that the battery has become acidic, there's no longer any more light, there's no more spare electrons. And that is it. I have many friends and their body still was pretty good, but they passed away, and many might have thought, well gee, this person was just dancing the other day, it's like amazing. And their body still seemed to look fine, but they less than were able to keep that flow of electrons. And the more advanced the organism is, how very important it is to maintain that flow of electrons. So a piece of poison that an insect ate kind of really didn't affect the insect much at all. It had very hardy ability to manage its electrons, but then a bird ate that insect and bam, the bird went down. The bird had a much more sophisticated system, more complex, very important that its electrons were flowing. It ate that material that was a toxin that the insect ate, and unwittingly, and became a victim of that sort of material. So our body is also a lot like this. One can have brought things in that can have really caused electrons to less than flow properly. We really have said that the primary reason for death, which is eat with a D in front and an H behind, is eating, and that we've said that the primary cause of disease, as a Phoenix physician, one of the primary causes of disease is overgrowth of bacteria, mold, fungus and yeast in the intestinal tract, and having to keep this at bay. Overgrowth of mold, fungus and yeast, having excrement, those little microbes used our body as a sewer for its excrement, and then this is called a mycotoxin, and those mycotoxins that are excreted by mold, fungus and yeast can have been pushed to the very periphery of the self, and there in the very skin of our self and very periphery of our self, it can have caused the blood vessels, the capillaries, less than to have remained nice and dilated and open. So in other words, it can have caused blood flow less than to flow nicely. That's Raynaud's syndrome, that blood circulation, that's one of the major causes of blood circulation, cholesterol deposit and all this sort of thing also. So we really have said that the blood condition wants life to arise, and I've worked with many people who have had immune compromised, and we can get that person's blood after 2 weeks, and we try to put something into the blood, and actually we won't be able to culture anything in the person's blood after a couple of weeks. But my God, take a little bit of that blood, put it under the microscope, do an oxidative stress test on this, and lo and behold, oh my God, if somebody hasn't cleansed, the kind of stuff that will grow out of the blood, it really would cause you to want to be on this path. you know, really would want to cause you to be on this path. Because when we take a little bit of blood and we do what's called an oxidative stress test, we're allowing the blood to dry on the slide. We're basically mimicking what would sort of occur in the body if oxygen would have been suspended. And so whatever condition there is there now, and just pulling the plug on the oxygen causes whatever is present to sort of fruit. And so then you'd be surprised the kind of life forms and things that can grow out of the blood, mold, fungus and yeast. If one ate lots of animal product, dairy and things like this, then their blood and the organisms in the blood primarily is going to be Aspergillus niger. Why? Because those stock were all fed mouldy, fungusy food, which was stored in bins and silos, God help them. Their flesh become composed, just like all organisms, everything, their flesh, and it can just become composed of these organisms, and one small change in that animal's health, and bam, the life forms that's composed that animal can recycle that animal back to the dust that it's composed of. Enzymes are very pH sensitive. We said that there's this background chemical, you could say it's a background canvas, which is a biochemical sort of soup, which is a background canvas that, like an artist would paint on this background canvas, all chemical equations occur on this background canvas with the terrain of our body, which the tissue of our body should be kept at around about 6.8, and our blood should be around about 7.3. So the tissue is slightly acidic and the blood is slightly alkaline. Tissue becomes more acidic as life goes on, generally, that's called age, and the blood becomes more and more alkaline. And the disparity between the two causes enzymes less than to be able to function as well as what they can, and causes the terrain of the body less than to be kept. Colloids of the blood can transpose themselves in this condition into acid-fast, cell wall deficient bacteria. So our bacteria is without a cell wall, which in modern medicine they didn't even think that a bacteria could exist without a cell wall. But these can be seen in the blood years before cancer arises. The terrain of the body already has become fermented, and the bloodborne inhibitors are not inhibiting these life forms to the stage of their evolution, which is perfect for our body, but have allowed to have gone on to become mold, fungus and yeast. So if we bring plant fibre in that was cooked, it's missing its enzymes to be able to be broken down. Plant fibre is mainly cellulose. It's made out of cellulose, that's plant fibre. And what is the protein of our body? It's called collagen. So the difference between animal is that the protein is more collagen, and that the difference for the animal, is collagen, and for the plant is what? Cellulose. Excellent. The enzyme that breaks cellulose down is called cellulase. Do we produce cellulase in our body? No. What happens to undigested plant fibre? It has to ferment. What does that mean? What's that equal? Yeast. Yeast causes an acidification of the body that gets deposited as fat and material, that causes a loss of electrons, and that we said that our blood and our body really is still in its colloidal state as it has spare electrons. When there's no more spare electrons, the flashlight will no longer come on. It takes two poles to get a current. If you have only one pole, you're not going to get a current. And what the positive pole is the nucleus on the inside of the cell, is very positively charged, and the outside is negatively charged. You always have to have these two poles. When these two poles become no longer, life also is no longer. Electrons have to be present for the lymphatic system to flow. How is it possible for someone to have a healing? It was just faith healing. They got struck on their head, they fell backwards into the crowd, they were caught, and they got up and they threw their crutches away. How could this be? Somebody took a homeopathic remedy and bam, you know, within minutes they're feeling better. How come? Hypnotist, someone has whiplash, and it's so incredible that as a form of intervention, how do you think hypnosis could be effective? But hypnosis is more effective than many other kinds of interventions into whiplash. How could that be so, you might think to yourself? You mean somebody just talked to another person and they had a healing? How could it be? And that could be perfectly understood, which we're going to be talking about when we talk more about our behavioural change work, which we're amongst the finest technicians in the country in change work and stuff. So we're going to teach our physicians some of this change work. But on all of these healings that took place, one common denominator is all healing only can take place and does take place as a result of causing the lymph to flow again. Whether that's homeopathic, whether that's life food, nutritional fasting, Jubb cell rejuvenation, or trampolining, or mandalas, or whatever it is that somebody has done, it does cause the great circulatory systems to flow again. One great circulatory system is the cardiovascular system, that's the blood flow. Another great is the lymphatic system, and another great circulatory system is the digestive system. Okay, so they are the three great circulatory systems. We also have a which that absolutely is fact. That also is another great circulatory system. Most people in science today, at least, understand the first, but the plasma body also, there's four great circulatory systems within our body. So all here. When there's no spare electrons, what's the very first system lesson to flow properly? The lymphatic system. What is the lymphatic system? Lymph is that channel where macromolecules, large molecules that less than can easily fit into the blood, are transported to lymph nodes where they can be broken down and this sort of thing. So the lymphatic system is simply the channel where macromolecules flow that less than can fit into the blood. And eventually they fit into the blood in the venous cava that's directly just above the breastplate, just right in here. What do you call this area here? It's called the sternum, the upper sternum. right just above the very rib cage here, the upper sternum. We have two sort of sinkholes in a way, energetically, major sinkholes, where it's much more negative. So energy flows from the protons to the electrons. This is much more negative, and everything sort of flows back here. All of this flows without a heart. Long before we had a heart, the blood was flowing. So is the heart a pump? No, it's not. It is not a pump. Most people have thought it is, and it's not. How could blood flow when there was no heart? Blood does flow even though there was no heart. How could blood flow if there was no heart, if the heart is not a pump? The heart merely is a regulatory force in the body, and the blood flows as a result of this negative differentials in the body, from positive to negative energy flows. Temperature differentials and pressure differentials are the major cause for blood flowing in the body. The heart merely is a regulatory pump, performs a regulatory role. So blood is an isotonic fluid, meaning it has spare electrons and it flows nicely while it has spare electrons. What happens when you eat a lot of macadamia nuts? Yes, blood less than flowing nice and discreetly. If you can imagine 6 red blood cells, let's imagine 11 red blood cells, and imagine that these red blood cells are all discrete and flowing, and we have 100% surface exchange. Beautiful. What happens if we all of us as cells, we all come together now in one big bundle? Our surface area can have been reduced maybe 80% or more. Same with the blood. This great circulatory system only has its good surface exchange as a result of the red blood cells being kept discrete. When you do acid food, what happens to the blood? It congeals and coagulates. Right. When blood is congealed and coagulated, can it penetrate the very deepest recesses of ourself? No. Blood has to be thin enough to be able to penetrate and act as a solvent to get into the very places. So what is the very first sense to lessen be kept because of all eating wrong? Our hearing. Why is it that the hearing is the very first sense lesson to be kept nicely because of all habits of eating? The reason is because the tympanic membrane, which is that very, very thin tissue that is so taut, it's acting like a drum and releasing pressure from the inside of the ear so you can hear. I mean, there's a slight amplification that amplifies things by 1% at the eardrum, but the eardrum primarily releases pressure from the inside of the ear, and that these sounds that you're hearing as you listen today to this information, these sounds are impinging on your bones, and your bones primarily are the major conductors, and they are conducting these sounds into the brain, and then the brain is registering what the meaning of this is, because these sounds can only be made with a certain type of motor movement, and the sound is only able to be translated as a result of the motor cortex of the brain, your brain, being involved in listening, because these sounds require a certain tongue and mouth and throat and lip sort of movement to make these sounds, and so the sounds impinge on the bones. The bones conduct the sound to the cochlea, and the cochlea primarily through the oval window releases the extra pressure, and the tympanic membrane is very involved in this releasing of pressure, and it tense. It's sort of called, it tense, sort of, it's ordinarily straight, but it's sort of tense like that. So that tympanic membrane only has one, it has very fine capillary in it, which is only in one direction. It's only one platelet of blood can pass through that tympanic membrane at a time. So after beef, bagels and cream cheese meal, what happens to the blood? It becomes congealed or coagulated. And what happens to the ventilation of blood through the tympanic membrane? It can't respire the cells properly. So all our information relates to an insight into how we go about getting the cells to be respired, and that all nutrients have their end role in helping the cell respire. So all nutrients really are involved in cell respiration. It takes two poles to get a current. Cooking causes those poles not to be present. Bacteria spontaneously rises up out of the blood. If the blood is less than excellent, then mold, fungus and yeast will arise directly out of the blood. If toast is present in the blood, or spaghetti, that will break down into the very materials that is the extraneous material that was brought in. It will break down this material, and then because it really is deranged, often if it were toasted, lots of deranged sort of materials and things, your immune cells have to gobble and eat that up, and they do such an amazing job cleaning house, it's unbelievable. But why not have a clean house? Why not actually, when you look there is no debris in the blood. If you could see people's blood how I have, you just would be shocked to want to avoid much of the debris that people have brought into their bodies, which causes them to age incredibly. In my family, I am, one of the oldest siblings, but I look like I am the youngest by many, many, many years. And everybody says that I'm the youngest in the family, though I am the oldest. But I am the youngest in the family, and that's quite perplexing to them. How could it be? Because I look, for the most part, much the same as I left, many years ago. Basically, my weight has not changed. Maybe I'm a bit lighter than I used to be. I used to be a bit heavier before I stopped eating. I had a little bit more layer of fat on, So we might also consider, if one only ate poison food, how could they be able to survive? And that caused me to have such a deep realization that, hey, here's somebody and all they've eaten is just absolute junk. They poisoned themselves with what they ate. It was just like heroin. They never ate anything ever, and they only ever ate something that was absolutely toxic. How could they have survived, I thought to myself. Could not somebody survive if they just did not do any of that? If they were able to survive by poisoning themselves, is it possible to consider somebody could survive unbelievably, perhaps, without that stuff? Certainly, it's possible to go without, and as we go without more, our system returns to its orderly self and is self-regulated. As we can allow our system to self-regulate itself, it will self-regulate. But if we're continuously putting stuff in, could it ever self-regulate? No. If somebody is less than well, and they would have had an aspirin, how do we know what's there after they've had an aspirin? We have no idea. But maybe every now and then an aspirin can be allowable. Where somebody is, there could be something that could be helpful a little bit, even if it was a bit poisonous. I just will let it go on the machine. So probably one of the most primary things that we really have talked a little bit about is that colloids have a structure, and the habit that someone has formed, if it was something that more we have evolved to manage somewhat, then it sort of fits in. But if it's something new, like cooked food, and then all sorts of foods that people eat, and then antibiotics, fertilizer, food additives, colorants, preservatives, hormones, and then all kinds of flavour enhancers and this sort of thing. Many of these things are that you never would feed that to your baby, absolutely not. God help us if we only knew what natural flavouring is. You'd always look through labels and you'd see if it had natural flavouring, you'd avoid that, because that's absolutely poisonous. Very natural flavouring is a poison. If you only knew that they get sullied vegetables that could not be sold at the market, but has some goodness to it still, and then they get dump trucks of this, and they take the dump truck and they back it up into a vat, and and it all slides into this vat of sulfuric acid, and then it's boiled down in sulfuric acid, and then there's this sort of a brown goop. They neutralise that with caustic soda, and then after they've done that, they have this brown goop that they collect, and that goes on conveyor belts, and it's dried out, and it's like a ceramic material, ground down, and my God, when you have a little bit of that, that's going to make your mouth water like crazy. And you're going to want more of that. You have a little bit of that, it's like, my God, I have to have more of that. You know, and like a bag of Doritos, or we could rail on a lot of these foods. So if you eat a peach, there's an alliacidic taste change that occurs. You know, once you've had a peach or two, you know, you've lost the taste of a peach, even though you could have maybe something else. We less than care for any more peach. But that does not happen with a bag of Doritos or Ben's Pizza or something, you know. Some of these most delicious foods that are amongst the most favourite foods of people of the nation here. It doesn't happen at all. That material really is so toxic. It can't really be broken down properly because it doesn't have its enzymes. It has to either putrefy or ferment. If it's small enough, it's just going to go right through all the membranes of our cells. If it's between 2 and 20 amino acids, as long as it's just got free reign. So Canadian wheat, we're going to find that in your eyes and everywhere. Take a little bit of swab of your saliva, and my God, spicules will just grow on the slide profusely. And that's one of the most favourite wheats of the world is Canadian wheat. But it breaks down into just a gelatinous material that's, when it's cooked, it's extremely detrimental. And even when it's not cooked, it's made up out of organisms which are unfriendly and cause a dysbiosis to happen in the body. How are we going? Do we know?
9 minutes.
We have 9 minutes, so I'd like to make this very tidy. We have 9 minutes left. Let's see. Colloidal biology. Some of the most significant things one would ever be aware of as a Phoenix physician is that what you present to the body that is a medicine is in its colloidal state. Cooking changes the nature of things, and it no longer is very in its colloidal state, and it no longer is miscible with water. We said in the very beginning of this lesson that everything that we bring into the body has to be miscible with water. So would it be all right to boil berries down forever to get a syrup and then use that as a medicine? Not really. It does have some small benefit, but why not actually do this in a process that keeps all of its enzymes and all of its life force? There's a way to do things this way, so we're mindful on this level. We're mindful in colloidal biology as a Phoenix physician of realising that all disease arises as a result of an intestinal dysbiosis, and that our work is very much to dampen and cool and quench and clear away any inflammation that's present in the body. Daniel, do you want to just get that, because it could be Queenie or someone, she doesn't have the keys to the shop, or we've said that the terrain of the body is one of the most integral elements, and that as the terrain is kept, it keeps everything else at bay. We've said that the blood is isotonic. In its isotonic state, meaning it has the same tension and it has spare electrons, and it sort of keeps everything apart and flowing. Things that interfere with the colloidal system are all things which end up as an acid. Mycotoxins, which is the excrement of microbes, dysbiotic microbes, all kinds of debris that someone can have been brought into their body, can have acidified the body, and then there can have been less than a keeping of those nice electrons. We've also said that food undigested, food less than easy to be able to break down, overeating, forces which acidify the body and cause blood vessels to flow nicely. Certain bloodborne inhibitors can be present in the blood that blocks the expression of mold and fungus and yeast. And life food nutrition, as a life food area, your major concern as a physician is to make sure that people are bringing in some of those things to help keep these pleomorphic organisms at bay, and to help fortify and stratify the blood again through life food nutritional fasting. We get the intestinal tract to work again properly, get this great circulatory system flowing. Sometimes we do things just to put the person's mind at ease. Yesterday I had someone come who was in tears, and they really were fearful that they were going to die, because basically the doctor told them they were going to die unless they would take these antibiotics and these anti-inflammatories and stuff. And they were in tears, and they really felt they had this major condition. And I said, oh my goodness, no, you're going to be fine. Matter of fact, you're fine right now. And this is not an uncommon condition at all. And this can have happened in various stages to any person that's healthy. And I sort of embedded the command that the person's healthy. You know, no one had even communicated to them this way, had never even used the word health. And then I said to the person, oh, a few days will pass and you'll be completely healed up. You know, embed the command to be healed up. No one had ever talked to this person like that. I just saw the effect of what I said. The shoulders became relaxed, the breath rate became more relaxed, a little glow came back to the person like they had some hope, and that was just completely erroneous actually what had been said to them. So healing always occurs first with a change in our feelings, and all healing has its effect because it acts on the lymphatic system, on the lymph. All healing has its effect because it causes the lymphatic system again to flow. Colloidal biology, that's very important because our whole focus is on making sure that you have spare electrons enough to run the system, and that we have enough spare electrons to help cleanse the body. And so it's a balance of bringing in the spare electrons and getting electrons to flow again. That might mean clearing away debris, clearing away all of the mycotoxins and molds and fungus and yeast from the body through life food nutritional fasting, intestinal cleansing, parasite flushing, suppositories possibly, and then castor packs, and then there can be various supplements and things that someone can do to help them. But in particular, you know, if we paid attention to the first few lessons that we have had, we said that for a true healing therapeutic to have its effect, what is a true healing therapeutic involved? Yes, a change in one's feelings, a change in one's behaviour, a change in one's lifestyle. This is a true healing therapeutic. So aspirin or some pill or some supplement even is not a true healing therapeutic, and even this program, carnival barkers used to bark out, you know. Just snake oil, and even a good program is absolute snake oil, and this program also, just snake oil. Unless you do it right. Everything is just snake oil unless you do it right, okay? So, let's make sure we do things right. If you do things right, then things will work really nicely. Otherwise, it's just snake oil. I laugh, and lots of others laugh hard, especially those who have some training by the Native Americans. They laugh very hard. They think, oh my God, Wasichu, because that's all foreign people. Wasichu, the people who've come to populate the earth here recently, they're called Wasichu in Lakota. And they laugh hard because they feel we are so superstitious. How could we believe that a pill in a cabinet could be medicine? They just think it just seems strange that we've had this thought, because the direct translation of medicine means in their tongue intention. So the direct translation is intention, not some pill or something out there. So they laugh hard when we all say, oh yeah, medicine is some science that we're doing, we're going to research and find how to clone something, or they laugh hard. They just think, oh my God, how could Wasichu be so superstitious to think that is medicine? Medicine involves one changing their ways, and this is a true healing therapeutic. Everything can only be just snake oil unless that you do this right. Colloidal biology is a brand new science. It's a brand new understanding of biology. You who are watching this tape today and studying this course as a Phoenix physician can be empowered to have an insight beyond any other physician in the whole of the country. That unless you really have started to understand the colloidal systems and some of the that we've gone over today, many people can have just missed us. So let's do to ever become considerate integrity of the elements of things that we bring in as a medicine